Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys and the Sounds in Cinema podcast.
Everything sequel contains explicit language. And why the fudge not, you melon farmer?
Exciting. My name is Michael Shantz. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, the man trying to kill me with his mind or his dogs or his birds, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. What do you got to say for yourself, Tom?
We are now about to enter a highly experimental area where the use of toxic chemicals we hope will one day feed the world's hungry. I am reminded of two instances. The first, as you it will not surprise you, Terry Silver in Karate Kid Part 3.
Uh-huh.
And I remember the Riff Tracks version of that film, which you can watch online. At the point at which Terry Silver talks about dumping toxic waste, one of the commentators remarks, "I have come to a conclusion. This man is the villain." The second instance is the Great Mitchell, and please look this up. This is on YouTube as well. The Great Mitchell and Webb sketch, where the German World War II soldiers, one turns to the other and says, "Are we the baddies?" To which the other soldier says, "No, we're the heroes in our own story." And he says, "Yeah, but look at the guys on the other side. They don't have skulls on their caps." And I hate to say it, but if your plan involves toxic chemicals or toxic waste, you're the villain,
to help
right?
feed the world.
You're
you
the villain
are
of
the
villain. What's quite interesting is up until that point, Boya, as he's called, I thought that there was a possibility he might not be the villain, and then someone mentioned that toxic chemicals were part of his plan. I was going, okay, I guess that's decided now. It's a bit of a foregone conclusion at this point.
Oh, man. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with this unwieldy title. We're talking Damien.
Well, that was an appropriately
Omen II.
Unwieldy intro.
Yeah.
From both of us.
Damien, Omen II.
Yeah.
Just sounds weird. This movie is directed by Don Taylor. I don't know, you might not know Don Taylor. I know Don Taylor.
We know him all too well.
Let them know, Tom. What do we know him from?
Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Yep.
And Magnum Force.
Yeah.
He is probably even
Did I mention before that he also did the Final Countdown?
I think so.
I thought that was kind of fun.
For our purposes, though, I think even more than Irvin Kershner, he's the quintessential sequel auteur.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a lot to say in this movie about sequel surrogacy, as there is to say in Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Right, yeah. I mean, when you get your hands on one William Holden,
yeah,
that's a coup to start with.
Well, it's interesting.
Lee Grant too. I mean, come on.
Well, I guess since we're talking about it now, yeah, I can lay the groundwork. I mean, this film makes no bones, as with Beneath the Planet of the Apes,
right,
about the fact that the cast for the sequel are surrogates for the cast of the original.
Sure, right.
I mean, the first time they're introduced off screen, they're referred to as his new parents. So there's a clue. They go through the motions that William Holden goes through the motions that Gregory Peck did in the original film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was interested to find, I suspected while I was watching it that, there's an alternative reality in which William Holden was Gregory Peck.
Yeah, right.
Right. And I suspected that I was watching it, and then I found out he was the original choice for the Omen.
Yeah,
for the Gregory Peck role. So
what, didn't he have a conflict or something, and that was the only reason? I can't remember.
But it's so interesting. It's like retroactive surrogacy. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, who do we get? Well, let's get the guy we were going to originally hire.
Right. And once your first film's a huge hit, you know, he's going to say, hell yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, it's that kind of on the nose sequel surrogacy that we're used to from Don Taylor.
Yeah, exactly. And
because we had a lot to say about James Franciscus being the Pepsi Charlton Heston.
Yes, of
Beneath
course.
the Planet of the Apes.
But what I also find interesting that's coupled within this idea is that this is an aftermath sequel, but also kind of a remake.
Very much,
because like you said, William Holden is going through the exact same thing that Gregory Peck did in the first film.
Yeah, and that is also true of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And
yeah,
so
right.
I think there's a lot to learn about the art of sequel filmmaking from Mr. Don Taylor.
Yeah. But and you know what's interesting too is that this is an aftermath sequel, kind of, but it also takes place years later.
Well, it's I think
we talked
fiction.
we talked about that in our ranking episode, that one of the things that these sequels have going for them is it goes for them and against them, because there's a time lapse for the characters, but not in the real world.
Well,
in the real world, it's the normal kind of amount of time between sequels.
What it allows you to do is to age up Damien.
Yeah, right.
Which is a big reason why these films work so well.
Mm-hmm.
But what you lose is kind of historical reality, I guess is the best way to put it. Because once you get to the final conflict, this is basically the Clinton era that Damien is.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You know, in the real world, in our timeline, Damien would be speaking to Bill Clinton in that scene where he goes into the Oval Office. And so
they'd be talking about cigars and dresses.
And maybe that answers the question we posed in the ranking episode as to why don't sequels do this more with aging up the cast? It's like, because you've got to leave 7 to 10 years between your films, which
right.
economically is not a great idea.
It's not a good model.
No.
Well,
you got to boyhood it.
Yeah. I mean, this movie, it's a relative. Not a hit, but, this movie did relatively well. I mean, it only has 46% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Mm. Oh.
I think that's a little low.
Ooh. It's,
there's like a sequel bias, I think.
Yeah,
there is from critics, I think there's a bias against sequels. But on a budget of $6.8 million, only an opening weekend of $3.8 million, but in the USA and the world, 26.5. So it's not the smash hit that Omen was, but it makes some money.
No, but I mean, it's cinematic comfort food, at least for me. And I think that is less appreciated in critical circles than it should be.
Right, right.
I remember when I was at college, I went to a lecture by the esteemed film critic V.F. Perkins, and he was talking about a film called an anthology movie called O. Henry's Full House, and he said, we have aesthetics of quality in film studies, but what we don't have is an aesthetic of the quite good. It's like, this film is, it's that's the best way to categorize this film. The performances are fine,
right?
It's very watchable, but there's nothing we can do in criticism to sort of rationalize and quantify that. And I've been fascinated by that, especially as I get older, and that's kind of really the only film I want to put on. It's something that is comforting. Comforting more than it is good. And this is right in that wheelhouse for me.
Absolutely. Well, and I think
you don't want to poke too hard at why you're enjoying this film so much,
right?
Because it unravels.
And we talked about this, I think, at length in our ranking episode about how delighted I was by all three of these sequels when I wasn't really sure that I should be, but
Well, they've all got something to recommend them.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And they're all...
And they're so different from each other.
Oh, boy, are they. Yes.
You know? So...
Yes.
And I think we have to start right at the top, because for those that are paying for our Patreon, you might be listening lately to some Superman episodes, including Superman the movie.
I love the way your voice changes when you start to advertise the podcast, the monetized version.
It's a
of
little
our podcast.
gentler.
I know, it's like you go full on, pharmaceutical commercial.
Yes. But one of the only reasons that Richard Donner, who directed the first movie, Omen, did not direct the sequel is because he was knee-deep in Superman shit. And they took his name off of the second movie and hired another director, which I think is pretty funny.
Wait, you're talking about Superman, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because that there is a Superman 2 type dispute about the directors of this movie.
That's true, right.
Two entirely separate directors.
Yes.
Don Taylor
and Mike Hodges.
Mike Hodges, who started work on this film and was released early on.
And they kept scenes that Mike Hodges had directed, so
absolutely. And
I think probably on posters it was Don Taylor, but if you look on like an IMDb, it'll list both directors.
I would hazard a guess that the entirety of the cold open is Mike Hodges.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was I don't know if he was filming chronologically, but it literally looks like once the credits roll, it's someone else's film.
Mm-hmm.
And yet everything before that is, as a fan of Mike Hodges, looks like one of his movies.
Did you like the cold open?
Loved it. Best part of the film.
Me too.
Not to say that the rest is a washout.
No, yeah.
Easily my favorite part of the film. I
was very surprised because I think I was saying to you just off air, I was reading my notes that said heavy music coming in hot with the serene setting of Israel.
Yeah.
But then you have this car chase, essentially, it's a one Jeep car chase.
I'm gonna rewind just to point out.
Yeah, go ahead.
At least on the HBO Max version, of this film that I watched, which I believe you watched as well.
Yes, correct.
Untouched, late 1970s, 20th century logo.
Yeah,
and that does a lot for the cinematic comfort food aspect.
Oh
of this film.
Yeah.
And but of course, we talked before about how Lucas had to insist they put the fanfare back in.
Mm-hmm.
And in here you can see what it looks and sounds like without that.
Yeah.
So it's like you're glad you're getting the real thing, but actually the real thing was a modified version of the real thing in the late 70s.
Sure.
That unless you're hugely successful filmmaker, you just have to toe the company line and do without the big fanfare.
Right.
Also, the opening. I mean, you mentioned the dramatic music. This put me in mind of Eddie Izzard's routine about how you're in a high-end horror film, because when it starts, all you hear is choirs of children.
Yeah, right.
Whereas, like the B movie version of this would always start dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
But every time, when it's expensive, it's At least with the Omen films, I mean, that is thematically on message, right? That's
and they
thematic
don't
significance. Children and religion is at the heart of these films. So
and they don't waver from it.
As many choirs as you want.
Yeah. It's funny because one of the problems that they apparently had, especially for the first two movies, The Omen and its sequel, one of the problems they had was the idea, apparently, of just making a child scary. Which I found interesting because so many people find children inherently frightening.
Maybe that's post-Omen. Maybe that's... Maybe our thinking about that is shaped by the Omen films. Maybe
it
prior
could
to
be.
that, children were
serene.
Chil- Children were non-threatening.
Yeah. And the other thing, one of my other notes that I found really
It's like
delicious.
Jaws and sharks, right? Everyone
Yeah, that's
was fine
true.
with sharks
Right.
until Jaws came out.
I don't know if they were fine, but that movie said fear them forever, and everybody said okay.
Yeah.
And one of my notes was the same thing happened for this movie, just with the name Damien. Once that movie came out, nobody would name their child Damien anymore.
And not just that, there's a British sitcom called Only Fools and Horses. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It doesn't have international recognition, but it's like it's a Hall of Famer in Britain for sure. And they at one point the main character Del Boy has a son, and he names him Damien. And every time they cut to the baby, they have the theme from the Omen, and then like a slow, and it turns to slow motion. So so not only is what you're saying true, it became a running gag in a sitcom.
That's great.
It's like cultural consciousness is to the point where you could make it a runner in a long-running TV show.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other things that I found interesting in both this movie and the movie that follows it is this through line of the priests and knives.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say priests and knives.
The knives are the driving force of the
knives are the through
the trilogy
line
narrative, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
The trilogy arc is basically we follow the knives wherever they go.
The knives have a character arc.
They do. They have the most character development.
Yeah, it's great.
In all of these films. I mean, you mentioned that it starts with this kind of it's filmed like a car chase, but there's only one car. There's no
exactly. It's a one Jeep car chase.
One Jeep car chase. Leo McKern rushing to somewhere, which when he gets there, you realize he didn't need to drive there fast.
I don't know if we had to drive that fast. That was my note.
And it's such an attention-grabbing opening.
Yeah, I mean, it's so well shot, and it's
the attaching the camera to the car is such a good idea, and that's why I think it's Mike Hodges, because there are similar shots in Get Carter.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention that the guy he's going to meet is the second...
I forgot to mention that he did the original Get Carter. And
Lee Hendry.
You gotta love that. I know that
Lee
you
Hendry's
would.
Michael is basically the second build with Michael
Right.
Caine in Get Carter. Also, this guy seems like an early draft of Indiana Jones, doesn't he?
Yeah, totally.
He's an archaeologist and a fortune hunter rolled into one. I mean, George Lucas and Spielberg are taking notes when they saw this film.
Absolutely.
I
have a note here that says the actual cave-in to me was some phenomenal work. Like it looks so amazing.
And it really sets the tone, isn't it? Because I think the key to this movie is taking those act of Satan accidents that kind of tie the first film together, and not only having several more of them per film, but also raising the stakes on the kind of disaster level scale of them.
Yeah, right.
Like I don't think we had anything in the first film that was kind of a cave-in like this. This is like straight out of a disaster movie. I mean, the most spectacular.
Which was also popular at the time.
Yeah, and in the first, exactly, and as we've talked about with the Superman movies, every big movie's leeching off the disaster genre in some way. But in the original film, it's all a series of quite small accidents that are more about body horror, right?
Because the biggest one you get is the mirror cutting the head off.
Yeah.
Or not the mirror, but the plate glass window.
Yeah. And there's an equivalent moment in this movie of that. But around that, much bigger scale disaster-style accidents. There's also, it gets overshadowed by the decapitation, but Patrick Troughton getting impaled from the church spire.
The church,
is equally as good, I think. So But also the fact that you're back with a legacy character and actor, Leo McKern.
Mm-hmm.
The film is making out that he's gonna be the new David Warner for this movie, or
Right.
he's gonna play a large part in the story. And of course, pretty much the first thing that happens is he's killed off.
Right.
As is this entirely new character.
Yeah.
Who we've spent a lot of time getting to know, and is then instantly killed.
But I like that. I
think the fake
subversion.
It's worth it for the fake out. I don't know if it's worth losing those two actors and those two characters so early on.
All right,
it's definitely worth it for the fake out quality of this is going to be a film. Oh wait, it's going to be an entirely different film that takes place 7 years later than this.
Well, because we like this moment so much, and because we're also talking that we think Mike Hodges directed it, I just also want to say up front, Mike Hodges, also Flash Gordon. One of the greatest bad movies of all time. Love that movie.
Yep.
So much so, it was a teachable moment for Lady Chu on the How Dare You podcast.
Absolutely. And, not enough, and certainly not enough people have seen Get Carter that deserve to.
We're not talking with Sylvester Stallone, by the way.
No, for once, we're not talking about Sylvester Stallone. But that's one of the greatest gangster films of all time, I think.
Yeah, I just rewatched that within the last couple months.
Yeah, it's spectacular. But
now
that's the end of Mike Hodges in this movie.
I think so too. Yeah. Now here's an interesting note I have. I want to ask your take on this.
Yeah.
The producer Harvey Bernard.
Is he a Saint Bernard?
This is the thing, because this is so counterintuitive to how all sequels are. His quote for these movies was that you need to tone sequels down, not up.
He's not following his own advice, is he?
Well, I think he is and he isn't. Because...
where is he toning it down, do you think?
Well, I think what I mean is... All right. Yes, you're right.
Tell me. I'm interested to know.
Well, you're right in the sense of you like those the devil is working against you moments. There's more of them.
Yeah.
In this movie. And there's some huge set pieces, like you said. There's the decapitation of the head equal in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm being honest, I think that's the moment I fell in love with this movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a great moment.
Because I just think it's fantastic.
The waist slicer you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've already done the head. What can we do now?
Yeah, exactly. But I think... And I'm thinking maybe more of the next sequel a little bit more, where you're having these long soliloquies in darkened rooms and
the amount of silhouette in the final conflict is
right.
all-time high, I think.
But I don't get the sense that there's this I'm thinking of whatever the things we have today with Avenger movies and I was recently rewatching Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and you could just feel how set piece heavy it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I don't get that sense in this. You have some set pieces
That's
in
a really
here,
good point.
but there's still story in between, and those moments are quiet.
Yeah.
And there's still
really good
character development, and there's still things of interest going on. So I do think that to a certain degree, these movies do tone down some. They don't feel like... I mean, look, it's a horror movie, so there's going to be spectacle, but it doesn't feel like they're relying on spectacle.
No, I think that's a really good point. And you've seen the Omen more recently than I have, but I get the sense that some of the biblical undertones are played down a little bit in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Almost to the point where it gets so repressed it explodes in the next movie. But I had a lot of fun, like teasing out the biblical connotations of some of the scenes. There's a really great one
Right.
early on when William Holden is giving his kids money before they return to military school, and it feels like that this is a sort of like a church PSA video, and at this point it's going to freeze frame, and then someone's going to walk across the screen and say, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." It's that kind of
Right.
But it's not laid on too thick. Like in the next movie, like anytime, like they can't just do the Abraham storyline. They have to talk about how it is the Abraham storyline. Whereas in this film, I get to make the connections to biblical teachings.
Right.
And I feel like that's another. I don't know how it works in the Omen. I don't remember the Omen being particularly less subtle than this movie, but
No,
certainly
yeah.
here I feel like there's an undercurrent of religiosity
Yeah.
that is kind of nicely woven into the story, and they don't have to keep throwing it onto the surface to show you like a seal.
No, but did we talk about this?
Ship.
Did we talk about in the ranking episode that for whatever reason that kind of delighted me in the next film too? Like it didn't bother me, it didn't detract
Yeah,
for
but
me.
it feels more like religious filmmaking. It feels more
Yeah.
like
Oh, for sure.
But here it's more of an undercurrent.
See the last frame of the film.
You're also dealing with, it makes sense for the characters as well, because no one apart from one of the parents, which we'll get to later on, it doesn't know that Damien is the Antichrist. Damien doesn't really know he's the Antichrist. So it makes sense that when you do have these moments where you're engaging with Bible verses, that it's under the radar a little bit.
Sure.
Because the characters are not acknowledged. It's very much an unconscious Antichrist for most of this film.
And for the characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, we kind of open up after we have the cold open.
Yeah.
We open up on a family dinner, and Aunt Marion is there.
Aunt Marion, Sylvia Sidney.
Yeah,
Phenomenal performance.
Well, fantastic.
And this is great.
And it's another thing, kind of like the two actors we were, for the cave-in. It's this thing where she comes in so hot and heavy, that Damien, you're going to be a goner. But I was sorry to see her go.
It's not, that too, yeah. It's not as straightforward as you think it's going to be, because Damien is introduced to us almost as the moral center of the family, right?
Yeah, right.
He's better than his adopted brother because he's nicer to Aunt Marion.
Mm-hmm.
Then he makes an effort with her, and Aunt Marion's right about Damien, like her instincts are right, but she's also being a complete hypocrite. So we're unsure where our sympathies lie, and I actually think that kind of nuance is interesting in a film you're making about the Antichrist.
Yeah, right.
You're already empathizing with Damien in a way that you don't expect to, and also the people who are fighting Damien are not morally clean cut either.
Well, and it kind of, at a certain point, it runs counterintuitive to the first film too. When you first meet Damien at his youngest in the first film, he's very, smiley and impish. But at a certain point, he's running big wheels around and knocking people over. We're doing kind of the zoom in to his angry, I'm gonna kill you right now face, and I like that sort of inversion of this movie where you're expecting Damien to kind of be clued in to his devilishness, for lack of a better word, and like you said,
absolutely.
He's the one being nice. He's the one making effort.
Yeah, exactly, and there's for at least half of this movie is a sense that the Antichrist lives within him, but he can also kind of turn it on and off.
Yeah.
Almost like the soundtrack of the choir. He can just whenever that comes in, he's the Antichrist. The rest of the time he's Damien, and there's a sort of sense of, you spend the first half of the film going, how much does Damien know about how much he's the Antichrist?
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
but that's a good thing for the film. Like, I think that adds a layer to it that makes it very compelling.
Well, plus, I mean, this would be skipping ahead. We'll get there, but there's a moment later in the film where he realizes what's going on, and his reaction to it is very interesting.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
And, by the time we get to the next film, he's resolved whatever conflict he had, and it's somewhat, I mean, at least I think, somewhat less interesting, but it also means you can drive forward with the narrative more easily.
Yeah, right.
But all that work is done, of internal conflict, is kind of done in this movie.
Yeah.
So it's a necessary evil. Pun intended.
Pun intended. That's great.
Yeah, and this, I think I talked about this in the ranking episode, but that you can use melodrama as a compliment or an insult, I think. Right, depending on who is doing the melodrama.
Right.
Melodrama. Yeah. So when I say that there's the dinner scene is full of melodrama, I mean,
you're not wrong.
I'm not wrong, but it's but the people doing the melodramas, William Holden and Sylvia Sidney.
Yeah.
And so, I'm using melodrama in the sense of Kirk Douglas at the bottom of the stairs in The Bad and the Beautiful. These people come from the golden age of film melodrama, and they know how to do it.
And they know how to do it, right.
And that's why they're there. Because otherwise...
Well, and it's why it works.
It's just pure schlock, right? It's pure schlock and soap opera. But because it's being done by these actors, it's dressed up in a way that it looks almost artful.
Well, and plus, there's something interesting happening within the script, because there's that portion with Aunt Marion, or Sylvia Sidney as Aunt Marion, because she's taken a huge leap in logic.
Yes.
And we're not sure how she got there. But that shortcut, one, it just helps with push the narrative forward.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think it makes that whole scene kind of light up and makes it interesting. Because you as the audience member are kind of on the parent side. You're on William Holden and Lee Grant's side, wondering, well, how did she get there? And what the fuck? But behind that, she's right. Because you've seen the first movie.
Yeah. But you also know that she's not.
She's right, but you're not necessarily on her side.
You're not on her side, and because we get information that she's not a reliable witness, right?
Yeah.
So you've got the extra added layer of she's the woman screaming, "I'm not crazy,"
right?
Which just makes her sound more crazy.
And then wakes up dead.
And then so this is a pretty amazing kill count, right? If you
right.
This film so far.
Yeah. 10 minutes in.
3 in the hole. A few minutes into the movie.
Well, since we have 3 dead, why don't we take a break and then we'll come back?
Yeah, that's right. We go. This is just the.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had 1, maybe 2 craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beers. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are here discussing Damien, Omen II. directed mostly by Don Taylor and somewhat by Mike Hodges.
That was stand up in court, I think. That's the
Yeah.
definition.
Isn't it sometime right around here when we find out about the feeding of the people?
The feeding of the...
That's what I have in my next note. It's like that Thorn Industries, that's their goal.
Yes!
Yeah.
I put here, one of my notes here is like, this seems like a lot of detail. Is this ever going to play in?
Yeah, right.
And I guess it kind of does.
Well, I mean, they're still talking about it in the next movie.
Yeah. At the time, I'm thinking, I want to know more about what's going on at military school.
Yeah, because,
Yeah.
One of my notes is because he meets who we know as the great Lance Hendrickson, but he's Sergeant Neff, and you kind of have this sense, at least I did watching the film, I had this immediate sense that Neff is the new nurse.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's definitely a Satanist.
But what I like about it is it seems both overt and never said.
Yeah, yes.
You know?
And for some reason, this film gets away with it, and I don't think the next film does. The next film I'm going, okay, who thinks what?
Yeah.
But somehow in this movie, I don't know, maybe it's better filmmaking, but it doesn't bump me in the same way.
Is there a moment, by the way, with the two brothers that you feel like there are accents that fall in and out?
Well, Damien has a British accent.
Does he always, though?
Well, he grew up in London,
yeah.
Right? So my feeling is they remembered that, and so they didn't have any problem hiring a British guy to play the role. You know, think of Superman 2 with the British child in the middle of
in the middle of
Midwest,
Houston, or wherever they were.
So the fact that they have this excuse in their back pocket, I think they were just like, great, yeah, if we've got a British kid, put him in there.
Yeah.
But it's very strange because, you know, he left London at exactly the point at which it would have shaped his accent.
Well, my note was I have to ask
he should
Tom,
sound like he's
because he's the resident British person on the podcast, and I couldn't tell if accents were falling in and out.
He's definitely British adjacent.
And I couldn't tell if his brother was trying to put on a British accent as well for no reason whatsoever. I think that was the thing that confused me the most.
That I can't put together.
All right.
So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like this idea of Damien infiltrating the military, it's sort of something you couldn't do pre-Watergate. Like, for like the audience, it's like it feels like with this, the audience is, this is the, you know, the peak of paranoid filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just sort of like, we accept that our institutions are infiltrated by the criminal element, like right to the highest level, in a way that perhaps pre-Watergate an American audience wouldn't. Because it's not a big, they're not acting like it's this huge subversive thing. It's just like, yeah, sure, yeah. Military school, yeah. Yeah.
I didn't think about it for a single second. Is this even, because isn't this post-Watergate?
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. It's like but it's post-Watergate.
Oh, okay.
So, like, we've had the All the President's Men and the kind of, you know, the conspiracy stuff, and now it's just like, yeah, sure, he's infiltrating all institutions at the highest level. Yeah. That happens. We know
All right,
happens.
so, because I thought, you know, when you first said that you couldn't get away with this.
Pre-Watergate.
Yeah, right.
Like, it would seem like an affront.
Now
you got, when you do stuff like this on film, you've got history on your side. You're like,
right.
What about Nixon? It's like, okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
Sure.
Let's move on.
I mean, I don't know if I would have gone to that lengths just because, you know, it's a military academy for kids. How many of those
Yeah,
are
but
there?
the people who graduate for there are going to be
Yeah, that's true.
Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, that's very much the implication.
Right.
So he's basically got, the between the government hierarchies and corporate hierarchies, Damien is effectively in charge of America
Yeah, right.
and the
And
world.
well, you know what's interesting, because the movie's 1978,
Mm-hmm.
is that it feels like it's predicting Reagan.
Yeah, because it's set. It's historically set in Reagan's America before they knew what
Right.
Reagan's America was going to be. Yeah, but if you look back on it, you wouldn't notice the difference, right? You wouldn't be like,
yeah, exactly.
this is a prophetic. You wouldn't call it. You wouldn't say this is prophetic. You just assume it was made in like 83 or 85,
Mhm.
and then you'd go, yeah, sure, this is right on the money once
Yeah.
again.
And I mean,
the spect. I mean, you think about Reagan's political ambitions, and how much probably in '78 it's a foregone conclusion that Carter's going to do one term, and that the next guy is going to be an ultra conservative,
right.
to restore the political balance. Probably not that too hard to figure out that we'd be mired in a conservative nightmare by the mid 80s.
Right.
Although I do think that, weirdly, the stuff that Boyer is doing with toxic chemicals, trying to feed the poor, seems like a Jimmy Carter kind of plan.
I don't think he stopped short at the second you say toxic chemicals.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't think Carter would stand for that.
Up until that point, I thought this character was representing, the kind of Jimmy Carter style liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think that's that the Carter era is also built into this, but they're
Sure,
also
yeah,
looking,
right.
They're looking ahead in a way that anticipates Reagan as well.
Meanwhile, Damien's.
I believe, and historically, I seem to remember that it was sort of a foregone conclusion that Reagan was gonna, at least campaign for president as soon as he, upstaged Ford at the
Convention.
Republican convention in 76.
6.
Yeah. Anyway, Karen.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I mean, the same thing happened with Barack Obama.
Yeah, and there's even there was a great clip on one of those CNN decade documentaries. I think it was just in like a post-credit scene of them trying to figure, like, after Bush Senior wins the election, they're like, well, who've the Democrats got? And someone goes, there's this senator called Biden, and then all the commentators go, oh, come on, he's never gonna get it.
Right. But meanwhile, in our film, Damien is mind-throwing bullies.
Yes.
And
I didn't mention the moment that he walks. There's a shot of him walking, not through fire, but in a shot that's designed to make it look like he's walking through fire. Like, that's the introduction to Damien, the first time we see him. And again...
Oh, I'm not remembering.
Yeah.
You mean before dinner? Or
Yes.
Oh.
The very first time we see him, he appears with flames in the foreground.
Okay.
And it just reminds you, it's like, the production and casting is elevated, the content is not.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, that's going back, but yeah, I know.
Well, but this mind throw is interesting to me because it harkens back to what we were saying earlier, because Damien doesn't seem to know the extent of what he can do.
He can sort of turn it on and off like Carrie's telekinesis.
Yeah, right.
And that, I think, is part. That is kind of the. I mean, I remember it's the fourth film where they go to town on the Carrie-ness, but they're responding to that here, I think. And also, De Palma is also Hitchcock through the back door, so it's kind of like they might also be both pulling from the same source.
True.
The the next next note I have is about the reporter
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, there's just
who
one
breaks
random
the news of
reporter.
what happened in the cold open.
Yeah.
And she's already putting it together, right? She's like, there's like a chain of satanic mishaps
Right. Yeah.
that need addressing. And then something in these scenes that just I always think this only happens in films. Having a surprise present that involves a satanic artifact,
Right.
and people going, "How could this possibly go wrong?"
That's great.
Yeah, but that's where the 7-year time jump it works for the film, because this reporter is plausibly putting the pieces together because it's been 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if this was all happening right after the tomb collapsed,
Sure.
it would probably seem like we're rushing to conclusions. But she's like, no, I've been working on this for 7 years, and you're like, okay, fair enough. That's enough time to establish a connection, right?
Absolutely. But that's one of the benefits of time jumping.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it messes other things up.
Even if it means it makes your film a piece of science fiction, yes.
Yeah, right. And then, of course, what's funny is anybody that...
Speaking of Hitchcock.
Yeah, that thinks for a moment, 3 minutes later, we're going to kill... this movie is killing people at such a rapid pace. It's introducing people and killing them 8 minutes later.
The last thing you want to be in these films is someone who has information about Damien.
Yeah.
Once you have that, that's it.
You're
done.
fucked.
Yes.
Now, what do you think of the substitution of crows? Actually, I should say crow, because it's like a single crow that attacks the reporter. But crow for dogs, because we go back to dogs in the next, movies.
Yeah, no, I think well, let's credit where credit is due. The crow and the truck are working together. They're a team.
That's true. Yes.
I like it because obviously, it's a homage to the birds. So,
yeah,
this film is aligning itself to the very best horror films. It also it reaffirms my contention that every horror film post 1960s is either Psycho or The Birds. Can be
right. Yeah.
But again, it marries the body horror and violence of the original with this newly added disaster movie element.
Because she gets launched up, right? Into the truck.
I appreciate it from all those angles,
Yeah.
I think it's a really strong sequence, but the way you frame it is absolutely right. It's like, what other animals can we we have?
I just thought it was interesting because this is the only movie that decides to go non-dog.
Yeah. Well, I'm obviously in favor of that. I'm also pro-crow, so I'm a little bit conflicted. But I understand why, always my thing with dogs, and especially Rottweilers, is, having owned them, I'm like, there's nothing scary about them.
Yeah, right.
To me. But crows, even though I love them, and, there's a bunch of crows in the tree outside my place right now,
mm-hmm.
I get why they're scary when you see a bunch of them together. It's
not just that, but
that
crows apparently, crows really can problem solve. Crows are.
What does that mean? What does that euphemism mean?
Crows are. I was watching a special about crows, and they're super smart. And if you have to go through 9 steps of things to get the treat, they'll problem solve until they figure out how to do all 9 steps.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they could plan murders together.
So somewhere Satan has a treat for this bird, and
right.
Just the 9 steps are mauling this woman, making her go out into the road and get run over by a truck. Yeah.
Here's your pellet.
Here's your pellet. That's worth at least 2 pellets, I think.
You're right.
He's working solo.
And I have a note here because the character of Paul, Robert Foxworth, it's kind of the same thing as Sergeant Neff. We get the idea that he might be a protector and a Satanist too, like for the first time around now.
Right. And again, it's a difficult situation because he's seen, his plan to feed the world is seen both to... You can't figure out whether the status quo are not approving of it because it's too liberal or too conservative, right? The guy who keeps blocking him seems like someone who could equally be blocking it because it's progressive.
Yeah, right.
As someone who's blocking it because he's using toxic chemicals.
Sure.
I mean, we know that it's an evil plan. I don't know if this guy is blocking it because it's an evil plan.
And I'm trying to remember.
It might just be that he's an old, crusty Republican who doesn't want anything.
Is it Alan Arbus that doesn't want anything to do with it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Passerian? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
From MASH fame, he's Sydney.
So, again, that's like a nice wrinkle of ambiguity to the story that makes these scenes more compelling than they might otherwise be if it was clear.
Yeah.
If it was clear black and white morality on both sides. Because Paul is sort of really selling the idea that this is going to be an agent of social change, and it makes you think that the guy above him is like, that's what he's stamping down on. I don't know, man. Right. That's what I thought anyway. It feels muddy in a way, in a good way, where you're like, you don't know who to trust.
Muddy.
You don't know who's the hero of the story.
Yeah,
and
right.
That's great in a film.
And I actually, that's one of my notes for this movie. This movie kind of keeps you, like I said before, it seems overt, but you also wonder, am I on the right track here sometimes? Like with the Neffs and and I do
Definitely.
like that aspect of this movie, that you have this sense that what I like about it is it gives you this sense that there is a whole network of people working in concert or for Damien, and Damien is doesn't even know this.
Yeah.
And
this is only confirmed in the next film when we see
right.
It
feels
in one place,
but it feels insidious. It's really unsettling.
Yeah,
and for a horror movie, it works great.
It does. It works really great. Less great. Bill under the ice. Sometimes when the death scenarios get so elaborate, they start to become comical, and I think the moment at which they're chasing a drowning man under the ice.
Well, because it's also it's shot a little
like
awkward.
A Mel Brooks film at this point.
Yeah, it's shot a little awkward too.
Yeah,
where it's kind of like, I don't know, it feels like it's some sort of game. Find the man under the ice.
Chasing him under the ice.
Yeah, right.
It loses all credibility.
Right.
So I think their ambitions are just a bit too high at this point.
Is the ice part the part? Danger. Is the ice part the part in which William Holden begins to kind of suspect?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh yeah. It's at this point I started to wonder if too much of the satanic plan is being enacted by those other than Damien.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this is taking place in a part of the film that Damien's not in, but right after this, as almost like a lead-in, almost like the film seems to know when you need Damien to recognize his agency. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, right.
We have his kind of coming of age. He learns his origin story.
He sees the 666.
Yeah.
But like I was saying earlier, his reaction to it, to me, kind of takes this movie to another level of it's so interesting that he recoils and runs away from it. That's what he physically does.
It's kind of, this is again the choice to age him, to make him a teenager who's going through puberty, is it kind of overrules the problems of doing that in scenes like this, because tied up with his kind of puberty narrative is him discovering that he's the Antichrist at the same time.
Sure.
So it's the perfect time in his life to be exploring this idea.
Yeah, right.
Like, it's very clear when he's looking for the mark on his head in the compact, the makeup compact.
Yeah.
To me, that screamed of like puberty, and when you find a pimple, or you're discovering hair where there was not hair.
No,
before.
absolutely right.
To quote the Simpsons, the puberty PSA in The Simpsons, hair where there was no hair before.
Yeah.
It seems like it's all tied up, so it's a really interesting, dramatic, thematic way of him discovering that. And of course, the first thing he does is try to run away from his fate. Which is such an interesting idea. Like, making him afraid of his origins is kind of like, it's anti-hero. We're still in the 70s, so
sure,
Damien's
right.
still going to be an anti-hero for a little while.
But I think it's interesting that this movie tries to have the audience identify with him.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, like, I'm almost cursing the film for its efficiency at this point, because it's such a short section of the film, Damien grappling with his identity.
Yeah, right.
I wonder if we spent more time on that and less at Thorn Industries.
Yeah.
Talking about feeding the world with toxic chemicals. Maybe it would be more successful, because it is very. You have to do a lot in a very little amount of time.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that, because I had the same notion.
I like that it's short. I'm glad it's
right,
not stretched
exactly.
out, but
yeah.
there is an advantage to stretching it out a little more,
right?
Making it a little more elastic. Because he has to.
When you think about it,
he has to go from 0 to 60 very quickly.
Right. I mean, yeah. The last thing you're going to see of him is giving a death stare with flames behind him. Yeah. So we got to get there.
And we go back into the factory.
Yeah.
Because this is also, this is as well as being something of a disaster movie, it's also one of those late 70s, early 80s, paranoid plant movies. Like the fucking China Syndrome. Sometimes. But we know it's also a setup for an act of Satan.
Of course.
Style death.
Because we're gonna have
in the form of a chemical spill, which is and the accident also exposes Damien's Satanism, right? It's like a way for it to come out to people in the film,
right? Because he's actually visiting the plant.
Yeah.
So, like the reporter
convenient.
said, or even like Aunt Marion said, bad shit's following this kid everywhere.
Yeah.
Open up your eyes, Dad.
But it seems like these acts of Satan are sort of coming thick and fast at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because it also takes out the doctor in the elevator. This is where we get the waist slicer.
I really like that.
The showstopper body.
And that's Hollywood. That's Hollywood from Mannequin,
Absolutely.
We got Messuk Taylor.
It's it's like a festival of deaths.
Yeah.
In the way that the first movie,
that's one of my notes.
It out a bit better,
right? Yeah, that's one of my notes. Is that the deaths come hot and heavy in this section of the movie?
Heavy. I love that the Thorn Museum of Art is showing an Edward Munch exhibition. So it's like even the art shown to us in the world of the film is horror themed.
Right.
And then we go back to the knives.
We do,
which we haven't seen since
because Warren gets the knives.
The film. Yeah.
Charles, what's that actor's name? Nicholas Pryor.
Mm-hmm. So with half an hour to go, we're finally looping back to the knives.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And there's an interesting couple of scenes in the Thorn home at this point. They're watching a horse movie in their home cinema. You remember?
No.
You remember that? I tried to find what the film they're watching was, but I couldn't.
You couldn't find it?
But of course, it's a horse, which makes me think.
Because the scene that I remember is the
in the projector room.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
They're
them
setting
watching
out
something.
how
I just
his
don't. I didn't
brother-
remember specifically what they were watching.
Well, I couldn't find out what
Yeah.
they were watching. It was. I was like, is it International Velvet or Black Beauty or something
Mhm.
like that? I couldn't find out. But the fact that it's a horse, I think, is significant because of the horse-based horror of the first movie.
Right.
There is a horse scene there, but it's again, it's like a plot convenience because then you can have the scene where his brother's overhearing him in the projector room.
Right. So that's what I was gonna say.
It's reverse engineering the denouement of the film, where the
Mhm.
brother knows that he's Satan,
Yeah.
knows that he's the Antichrist.
And I think it's the best acting from the kids in the whole movie is when
Yeah.
they're together in that scene. They're so good.
Given their age,
Yeah,
ages
right.
and the kind of terrible acting we're used to from
Right,
actors
yeah,
of this
exactly.
age. Harry Potter. I think they're great.
Such an asshole.
By the way, I don't think Damien has to work hard to kill off his family, because the amount of meat that the Thorne family are consuming, they're gonna die of
Do
heart
them in any
failure
moment.
prematurely anyway. Corned beef, barbecue,
Yeah.
they're just like stuffing meat into their faces until it kills them.
Isn't there that moment in that fight where Damien says, "Come with me," and his brother says no?
Yes.
I
Is
remember
it-
that being really affecting. Like a
Well-
really great moment.
But that's one of those great Bible moments, right?
Yeah, right,
Because
right.
it's literally an inversion of Jesus and his disciples.
Sure.
And I mean, it's not by a river catching fish, but it's no fisher of men.
Right.
Yeah, I took religious studies at school, but it's great. I mean, it's definitely the undercurrent of that, right? It's relating to and an audience, like most of the audience who are going to see this have Sunday school upbringings, so this stuff is going to play to them in a way that it wouldn't necessarily now, where faith is much more of a mosaic or an optional part of society for a lot of people. Well, in certain parts of America. But certainly in 78, people are going to be instantly like, Mark's Gospel, this is we're Fisher of Men.
Right.
So it's almost like, it's like what Tarantino does with cult movies, but with the Bible.
Yeah, right, right.
And then, of course, the second undertone of that is Cain and Abel.
Yeah,
As
of course,
they're
yeah.
sort of brothers. So there's a religiosity throughout the story that's unconnected with the devil.
Well,
It's
I mean,
just like, this is stuff from, they're literally taking pages out of the Bible
yeah.
to stage the drama.
I think that aspect of all of these movies is one of the most interesting thing about them, to take the religiosity of America and then put that on its head and use it against an audience for a horror film.
And arguably the best
And they
film-
do it unabashedly, like, like religion is so prevalent in all of the movies. I find that fascinating about these movies. I think it's such a cool turn.
I think the third one is the least sophisticated with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
Dimension.
agree with that, but like I said, for some reason,
But it's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's
It's fun and silly. This film has some nuance. Weirdly, Omen 4 has that same nuance, which is interesting because the filmmaking is not what I would describe as nuanced, and yet
right. Yeah,
the content
exactly.
is.
Right.
But in this film, I think they go hand in hand. I think there's a and also it's a late 70s movie, so ambiguity is kind of almost baked in.
Yeah.
Like, in a way that it looks like by 78, no filmmaker has a problem. I mean, this is the director of Magnum Force. The guy's
Yeah,
knows
right.
what he's fucking doing with anti-heroes.
Yeah,
And
sure.
that comes through here. Not to mention some of this is directed by Mike Hodges. Get Carter is probably the quintessential anti-hero movie.
Of course.
Flash Gordon, the villains are more interesting than the heroes.
Yeah, but definitely.
Beneath the Planet of the Apes, I guess, is similar. It's like whose side are we
Well,
on?
you can't say those villains aren't interesting.
Well, you also it's also like that the film, there's no heroes in that.
Yeah, right.
No one reaches the
Hero
level
less.
of hero in Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
You want to take another break?
Yeah, let's do it. We're starting to get into the doom on, and I have a lot to say, and also a lot of questions because I don't necessarily understand everything that happens at the end of the film.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer. But
I just want a confirmation that I'm not missing something huge.
If you like podcasts like I do, boy, do I have a treat for you. You need to
Stay on target
and check out the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Listen as your host, sound designer and music creator Tony Parham, and co-host, musical performer and sound lover Derek Hansen, D-Rock if you're nasty, and I am, discuss all things sound related to film, television, stage, and theatrical productions. They discuss environmental sounds, bioacoustics, dialogue, the nature of communication through sound, but as an added bonus, they drink beer and try to
stay on target.
Find them wherever you get your podcasts and listen to the pure mania of a man who can charitably be described as Doug, the dog from Up, and another man with a soothing and sultry voice trying to get that man to
stay on target.
That's the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Tune in and listen to the sounds they are creating just for you. And we're back once again, ladies and gentlemen, finishing up with Damien, Omen II. The 46% Rotten Tomatoes movie. They're always fucking shit up. This movie's more interesting than 46%.
Yeah, revisit that. And, as we know, sequels are only getting worse.
Right. Now, there's a part of me that, because we mentioned how murder heavy this portion of the film was before we get to the end here.
Yeah. Yes.
But I just kind of want to backtrack a little bit, at least to Dr. Kane's murder with the cutting in half.
Yes.
Because like I said, I think this was the moment I fell in love with the movie, and I think it's such a great late 70s piece of body horror. The way it's shot, because it's schlocky, but still pretty, like, it's got a good amount of fright to it.
I agree. I think they're trying to make it more than simply body horror.
Mm-hmm.
But they're capturing the flavor of that as well.
Yeah, right.
And
then
in that way, I think it's very successful sequel filmmaking.
Right, exactly. And there's one other thing that I think we kind of left on the floor at this portion of the film, because we're at Thorn Industries a lot. We talked about, what's his name? Passerian's death, and, because Passerian's talking to, what's his name? Paul. He's talking to Paul about the murders, and of course Paul's working for Damien, so he's got to go. But there's a real kind of espionage feel to this portion of the film too, because it's all happening at the highest levels of their corporate entity.
Yeah.
That I think, again, it leans itself towards that Reagan era side of things that to me is, prescient and kind of interesting, that I really like about that particular portion of the movie.
I agree. And it's kind of, even by the end of the second film, there's a level of self-awareness that even the characters have.
Mm-hmm.
Because the great scene with William Holden dodges a crane as it passes. And there's this acknowledgement that even the characters in the movie are now aware of the formula of these acts of Satan accidents.
Yeah, right. So let me ask you this, because we're getting to it. We're getting towards the end, and we've barely mentioned William Holden at all.
Yeah.
So I find that in itself kind of interesting.
But it goes back to some of it is there's usually when we're talking about a surrogate, we're talking about how they do or don't match up to the original actor and or character in the role. With William Holden, that's not really a question, is it? I mean, he's he's one of the Hollywood greats. Of course, he's going to be up there with Gregory Peck.
Oh yeah.
But the movie's definitely, he doesn't carry the movie in the same way Peck did, I don't think, because we're only just at this point. He's only now becoming active in the detective work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He's quite passive for a long time.
Yeah,
he's he's just the guy going, no, you got it all wrong for like
3/4
least an hour. Yeah.
Don't you think? Do you think that's deliberate to set this movie off against, to do something different from the first movie?
I think there's just more going on.
Yeah,
more
that's true.
Subplots, plot strands. You've obviously got the added element that Damien is now a semi-adult, so he's going to have his own subplot in the way that he didn't in the original movie.
Yeah, that's true.
He was just being, it was just whoever was looking after him, the story was about them.
Yeah.
So, and if you think about Beneath the Planet of the Apes as well, what does James Franciscus do? He just goes through the motions of what Charlton Heston did in the previous movie. That's kind of what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
So it just seems less.
But we have to get through it quicker. So, at least this movie knows that.
Yeah, but because you cast someone like William Holden, there's not this great big Gregory Peck shaped hole in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, no, of course.
That's the difference, I think. I love that Damien is the valedictorian of his military school class. Because that, it cements the idea that, if you get the wrong person in charge of an institution like that, you could give birth to a new era of fascism.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Like the idea of everyone sort of saluting him.
Well, because earlier in the movie, there's that scene where he's showing off in history class by mentioning disaster after disaster, or armies destroying armies, or whatever it is.
Well, it's a really interesting example that he picks. It's Napoleon's invasion of Russia.
Okay.
Which was the plan that Hitler used to invade Russia, and it failed both times because they didn't.
Yeah. Right.
To death. So two examples of military dictator evil. Historically, it's very clear what the film is going for there. It's like this is if Damien continues to wield to get into the power institutions this way, he will become another Hitler, another Napoleon.
Yeah.
So it's a beautifully chosen example to illustrate where the film is going thematically.
I finally got caught, Tom. It's been so long since we watched this film.
Why would you? I don't think that's necessarily the most memorable part of the film, but
I remember really liking that moment of the film, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was he was talking about.
Sure. It's so that there's also in these scenes, and this is very 1970s as well, at his graduation party where he's surrounded by women. Like surrounded by women of his age and older who are sort of kind of I don't know, obviously being the valedictorian of your military school class means that the women
you get a harem
kind of flock to you. Yeah, you
right.
get exactly. And I thought this was kind of like a fun, albeit 1970s way to play with the idea of, the satanic imagery that this idea of like lust and vice surrounding him. Because he's, it's almost like a Bond villain at this point. He's sort of like, there's even a ladies leave us moment. There is like in here where he's chatting to all these women and he's called over and he's like, "I'll be back, ladies." And, oh my god!
But he should be petting a cat.
Yes, completely. And then this is what I meant about unanswered questions, at least for me.
Okay.
When his mother is revealed to sort of be one of his followers.
Yeah.
I can't now. I forget that this is the twist every time I see this film.
Okay.
So I always forget to check whether this stands up to scrutiny. I'm pretty sure it doesn't.
Well,
I'm pretty sure if you track the mother throughout the movie,
as we know, I had not
It
watched
doesn't add
these
up.
movies until I watched them for this podcast. And
did you suspect?
you know what? I want to say I might have ruined it for myself as I was like reading IMDb notes before the
Yeah.
movie, which really disappointed me. But like you just said, I wasn't sure that there was any like breadcrumbs leading to that.
No.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't something similar happen in Magnum Force with the boss who's
Yeah.
revealed to be in charge of the I think this last I think that the director possibly has problems with last minute plot twists. Except Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which is one of the greatest last minute plot twists of all time in cinema. Yeah, so I have a faint suspicion that if you track the whole her activities in the whole movie, it doesn't stand up.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun moment.
But I
also,
do,
it gives us it gives us an inversion of the original movie.
I'll say this, because I think I read about it beforehand, but when it pops up and when it happens, I still went, ooh, I still went,
it's a surprise. It's a genuine surprise.
It is a genuine surprise. And
it
so,
plays
I don't know,
with
in that
what
way...
it's using surrogacy
Right.
in
Against
an interesting
you.
way. Yeah, against you, exactly.
Yeah.
In the same way that the dagger is supposed to go in Damien and it ends up going in the person who's wielding it.
Sure.
Which is clearly supposed to be as another inversion.
There's another thing.
The MacGuffin becomes the MacGuffy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's another thing in these movies in which one person has to be convinced that's not related, like not the parents, and they take it on very quickly, and they kind of go mad with it. What do you think about that?
It all boils down to that that painting of the Antichrist.
Yeah.
And how much it looks like Damien.
Right.
And I'm always interested that the film's
I saw Damien's face in the wall.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because it seems like it's that is not necessarily the smoking gun.
That
they think
exactly. I don't think so either.
The smoking gun is that he has 666 on his head.
Sure.
grab him, hold him down,
and everywhere he goes, people die.
Yeah.
Not so much the face on the wall.
Yeah. It's like, 666. But the fact that historically he looks like the Antichrist, given that. It's just a kid. Kids kind of look the same.
Right, exactly. I thought the same thing. I remember just thinking, my note was that I think they just put way too much stock into that idea.
I guess because it's so visual, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
So, it's such a good reveal of... It's such a shock moment.
But what I wrote down was, I'm sure there's 7,000 kids that look like that picture on that wall.
Right.
Could be anybody. Anybody.
And it reminds me that these films are sort of the reason I think they go with that instead of the 666 on the scalp is that they have to dance around the ease with which you could prove that Damien is the Antichrist.
Right.
like I say, you could literally grab him, hold him down, look at his head.
That's all you got to do.
That's all you got to do. So the film has to find narrative ways to work against that, or the film will be over in seconds.
Sure.
So I think that's why they don't go with the 666, and why they go with that old painting kind of looks like Damien at this age. Which again is that's like what the painting was done of the Antichrist at that exact age.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Now. I mean, this is going back a little bit, but we talked earlier about Damien running away from learning who he is and his purpose. Is there a transition to him accepting?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so either.
No, it's all resolved in that one sequence.
Right.
Which is what I'm saying about there needs that doesn't need to be. It's fine, but it could benefit from that sequence could either benefit from being a little bit longer, or at least the inner conflict could be stretched out a bit more. But it feels just like something the film has to kind of go through the motions of,
Right.
so we can carry on with the movie.
Okay. Yeah, those are. There are some lingering things within this movie that, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
Where I knock it down a small peg or two, but
yeah, agreed. I think I think compared to the other two films, I think this is the most character complexity that we get, at least with Damien.
Yeah.
But
for sure,
even that, there's a kind of time limit on that. We've got to get to the next act of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to get to the knives.
I know. We talked earlier. I was just saying
we've got half an hour left. We've got to get back to these knives.
Charles Warren is the one that gets the knives, and I was thinking just a minute ago. I was like, we haven't gotten back to the Ark of the Knives yet, Tom.
Yeah.
But not, like you said, they try to stab Damien and end up stabbing.
Yeah.
You know, themselves, right? Or himself.
Themselves, yeah. So this movie ends with an impasse.
Right.
A pretty good one.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, you know, I guess nothing is going to beat the death count of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. But,
no, of course not.
But let's let's say in other Don Taylor films where the Earth is not destroyed, it's a pretty high death count.
Sure. And, you know, just burning an entire museum down.
Yeah. I love that this film ends with a Bible quote, because it's hard to imagine anyone's not on board at this point with the fact
yeah, right?
Exactly. The Bible is the basis of this film.
Yeah, but they do that with all of them.
Like,
they do that with all of them, you know?
I know, but it would be hilarious if there's someone with a minute left in the movie and they see that quote, and they see that Bible verse and go, "Oh, I see. The Bible!"
That's great. I get it now. So you're saying these are kind of vaguely religious.
And it half makes me think that maybe that was some kind of like test screening note that this film got.
Right.
Because in the next film, like Bible verse is the first thing you see.
Yeah, right at the top.
Like straight in. So it's like there's a note from the producers. You know,
put it at the
we
top.
need to be more upfront about how much the Bible is in these films.
That's fantastic. I mean, last notes, anything else?
No, that's it. That's all I have.
Credit check?
Yes, indeed. Raven Trainer.
Yeah.
It's pretty high up on the credits.
Right.
It's like a film where certain key roles are those that would be further down in other movies. Israeli motion picture service. So not only were those scenes in Israel done by a completely different director, seems like a completely different film crew as well.
Yeah, I think so.
That is, you could almost say it's a mini movie in its own right.
Yeah, it's got a resurrection feel.
It does.
A Halloween resurrection feel.
Say the same that I did then about that. That probably in the internet age, that scene would have been a kind of viral short, the cold open of this movie to bridge the two movies.
Yeah, right.
Probably would have started proper with the William Holden part. Only one cop in the Chicago Police Service is thanked.
Okay.
Is this a backhanded way of saying that the Chicago police as an institution were unhelpful? It's like, well, there was this one guy who was on it. The rest of them...
Frank was great.
Yeah. Frank really helped, but everyone he worked with, not so good.
They kept asking for bribes.
I was surprised to find that possible. I mean, I don't know how this is possible, and certainly not true of the either the previous film or the next film. But none of this was filmed in Britain.
Yeah, right.
Which makes the Damien's British accent even more baffling. I was convinced it would say either Pinewood or Elstree in the credits, and it's neither.
It is baffling because you have to, he was so young when Mom 1 and Dad died. So he went to the U.S. young.
Yeah. And then, and in the next film, it's confusing because people are talking with British accents, and you're like, okay, but are they in America or are they in London? Then you find out they're in London. It's like, okay, that's why they have British accents. It still doesn't explain why Damien is British. I like that there's a final choral sting after the credits are done.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like the audio equivalent of a final scare, but done entirely with the soundscape. Right. I like it a lot. That's all I have. That's my credit check.
All right. Well played.
Yeah, short and sweet. For me.
Done. Yeah.
Most people don't pay that much attention to the credits. This is a lighter credit check for me.
There you go. I seem to recall the last few. All right, strap in. We got a lengthy one. That's not my fault. That's the credits' fault. There's a lot of credits.
Movie. Oh my god. Yeah. But also, I mean, I suppose that speaks to how short credits were even in that period.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think with all the other Don Taylor movies we've done,
yes,
like 20 seconds of credits.
Oh man! All right, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Damien Omen II is in the books. Coming up next, well, I guess it's really called The Final Conflict. Eventually, it was called Omen III: The Final Conflict.
Well, and just before, because we're going to talk about that in the next episode, but we didn't really talk about Damien Omen II.
Yeah, right.
Does this suffer from the first blood problem?
Yes, that's exactly it. Actually,
it's the same. It's the same formula, right? It's the
absolutely
the name of lead character
followed by the title that you originally had.
Yeah,
yeah.
But it's pre First Blood.
You're right.
So technically,
so Stallone learned no lessons. He must not have watched these movies.
Yeah, Rambo is pulling an Omen.
Pulling an Omen, pulling a Damien.
Yeah.
That'd be a good death match. Rambo versus Damien.
It's so interesting to me that it's got to be like a clue to the audience, I suppose. Does it mean that Damien's going to be more front and center than he was in the first movie?
I guess Rambo it could be. It also could be.
First Blood is all about Rambo.
Yeah, it also could be as simple as now that everybody knows Damien is dangerous, and like it might just be a clue into, hey, come see what Damien's up to. Like he's gonna be up to some shit.
The further adventures of Damien.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
which is definitely the Rambo part. Is like, I know he originally he was supposed to commit suicide, but he's back.
And so what I'm wondering is maybe they thought that people knew the name Damien more than they knew the Omen.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Right? It's a shorthand for the audience.
Right.
It's like, you know the Omen? No, I don't remember. The Omen
with Damien.
Oh, Damien. Yes.
Right. I like it. Well, coming up next, Sam Neill is involved.
Yes, our first and last glimpse at adult Damien.
There you go. All right.
Boy, did they cast that well.
Yeah. Look forward to that coming to you soon. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, Michael Shantz here of the How Dare You Awards. Like we said, when you hear us next, it's Omen 3, The Final Conflict, or just The Final Conflict. No matter how you slice it, it's the final conflict. That's not the final conflict. Say goodbye to everybody, Tom.
Damien was not affected by the gas.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, there you go. That must be, I tell you, I think they're talking about the amount of gas that's in the Thorn home after eating all that meat.
It was the late 70s, Tom. That's what we did.
They could rename that estate Fart Town, probably. That's what they should have done. Is be like, Damien is somehow not affected by all
this meat.
All the stinking gas.
He's not affected by any of this meat.
Yeah.
His arteries are clear. Must be Satan.
Right. He still doesn't have heart issues, even though we've been shoving corned beef down his